This is Hockey Talk, where we talk everything hockey. I am John.
And I'm Mike.
All right, Mike, let's go. Now, tonight's episode is basically going to be dedicated to keeper hockey pools. Something that you've been part of for years. Mike here, my great co host, who has won a number of hockey pools. And when Mike doesn't win, he's very competitive. He finishes second and third a lot. He finishes in the money. Now, one thing I want to say, people, about hockey pools is it is gambling. If you can't afford to lose the money to join the hockey pool, don't do it. Another thing is in hockey pools is you're trying to predict the future. And I'm sure even Mike can tell you predicting the future is very tough. There's no guarantees. Mike is not going to give you the secret formula to winning all the hockey pools that you go in. But what he might do, and what he might be able to do, is give you an edge. And in the end of the day, getting an edge is what you want. It might be something that could help you go from fourth place to maybe second place. Who knows? Maybe get in the money just by listening to Mike and see what he has to say. So now, Mike, let's get into the very first topic of hockey pools. For anyone listening out there, what is a hockey pool keeper league? Now, you can just be very basic about it. You don't have to go into a whole lot of detail. But also, how are some different? Because I know you're in more than one hockey pool this year. You were telling me that earlier. And can there be a lot of variations, or are they all fairly similar? What do you think?
So keeper hockey pools uh, are hockey pools in which you get to keep some players from your previous year to start with this year. So I'm in a few different ones. And there's some that are very simple. One of the pools you can keep four players going in, so it's fairly simple. The amount of players that you pick, if you're only keeping four, then you're filling out the rest of your roster with like another 18 players. Basically, it's an 18 round pool, and that's your like basic like Yahoo pool. Okay. Then we also have another pool that we do that you can keep up to 12 players, and then you it's an auction style pool. So then you're bidding on the rest of the players to fill out your team. And generally the roster for those type of pools are like 20, 22 players, depending on, how many owners you have in the pool. So one of the other pools that I'm in it's a dynasty pool. So you can keep up to 38 players,
Wow.
which yeah, so which includes minor league players, players in junior, but you wouldn't dress 38 players as your roster. You'd only dress like very similar to the NHL, um, where it's I think 8 or 9 forwards and four defensemen and a couple of goalies. So and then you alter your lineup weekly. There are other pools that you alter your lineups daily. So quite a variation in the type of pool that you're in, but ultimately at the end of the day, you want to have the best players on your team, or better players than obviously your opponents have. So you're never going to always get the best guys. You're not going to get Kucherov, McKinnon, McDavid, all that type of thing. Not going to happen. Not in these type of hockey pools. So, but you want to try to get, a group of guys that are going to put up the most points as far as overall when you're looking at things. So that's kind of how the hockey pools work. The keeper part of it, like I said, is carrying over players that you've had from the previous season.
Okay. Now that's all very interesting. And I mean, it sounds like a lot of work because you're talking about all these different pools, whole pile of different players. So in order to be, let's call it successful. In order to be successful at these keeper hockey pools, you must have to do a lot of preparedness. I mean, you must have to study a lot. So at the beginning of the season, Mike, how much are you studying for one of these? Well, for several of these hockey pools, how much time do you have to put in to be good at it?
Well, I mean, for if you're doing one pool, you got to put in, I would say, a minimum of 8 hours, like because it's like a work shift basically. If you want to be fully prepared, I would say you want to put in about 8 hours going into your draft, knowing who's available, knowing who you want to target, setting up your order depending on your draft style. If it's like just a round by round type of draft where you pick players, you want to make sure that you rank them properly so that, when it's your turn to pick, you're picking the guys that you feel that you're getting the most bang for your buck for. Secondly, in like the auction style draft, obviously you got to prepare for, bidding on players so that you stay within your salary cap. So with those ones, you want to make sure that, you have specific, targeted players with the amount of money that you're willing to spend on them. Um, so, with that being said, like I said, at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you're picking the best guys for your team. Now, sometimes you're going to bypass maybe the best forward and pick the best defenseman or the best goalie. So, you're not always necessarily going to draft the best player every time if you have positional needs. So that's was one of the things you got to keep in mind when you're doing your draft, is to make sure that you're balancing your team out so that it's you're not stuck with a bunch of players at the very end, say on defense, and you're like, oh my god, these guys are only going to get 25 points, and that's not probably going to be that successful if you do it that way. So you want to balance out all the positions rather well. So.
Okay, well, let's just move on to the second topic. And Mike, I'd like you to give us some do's and don'ts about these keeper league hockey pools. Let's start with the do's. Can you give us some do's, some stuff you may need to do or you should do as going into these pools, or maybe even during the pool?
Okay, so keep one of the do's is keep on top of what's happening. So always check. Personally, I check daily, on some of the sports sites to see what's going on with certain players, injuries. Are they missing game? Are they losing playing time to other players? Things like that. So you want to make sure that you're keeping on top of that. What's their line placement? Like, it's very important that you know who guys are playing with going into a draft, as well, so that you know what, or you can kind of gauge what type of production you're going to get from those players. The other thing is to, through the season, follow up regularly. I mean, I've been in pools where some guys, they look at stuff once a week. I'll be honest with you, the guys that look at stuff once a week generally don't do as well as the guys that are looking at stuff on a more regular basis. Um, so that's one of the things, is to keep on top of things right away, plan things out, know exactly when you're going into a draft. Like I said, know the players that you really want to target and look for. And if you can't get those guys, try to get the players that are somewhat similar. I mean, everybody has their favorites. They like to get guys from their favorite teams and things like that are going to do well. They want to get guys that, are on very strong teams. And with that being said, I've seen some really good players overlooked that are on some of the weaker teams, which, probably should be picked. So don't just rely on the best players on the better teams. Some of these guys on the weaker teams are actually pretty good too. Um, so those are a few things that I would suggest that, going into a pool, that you should be doing, especially if you're a first timer. Um, be prepared, because there's always going to be, you're always going to have some guys in the pool that are all over this stuff all the time that really know what they're doing. So.
Right, right. Okay, so how about any more don'ts that you would say? Don't do this, don't do that during the pool, before the pool? Anything specific?
Yeah, so for don'ts, I would say don't go in with a list and then panic if you don't get all these guys that you wanted on your list, because you're not going to. If they're on your list, then they're on everybody else's list too. So you got to be prepared to have some backups. If you don't get the guys that you really want, you need to have um, a plan to pick the rest of your team. The other thing too is, don't go in just looking at last year's stats, because last year's stats are not irrelevant. However, they're not going to do anything for you this year. You want one of the things that I tend to do when I'm looking at players is if you say you have a player that's fairly consistent, they get say 60 points all the way through his career, those are the guys that you kind of want. If you're if there's guys that are 40 pointers their whole career and then last year they get 60 points, well, doesn't quite make them a 60 pointer necessarily. So you want to make sure that you're not just focused on what last year's stats were. You want to look at you know what they've done over their career, so you can kind of gauge what you're getting, type of thing as well. So yeah, those are the couple things that I would say primarily for a don't. But there's so many, and I mean, for those of you that are in hockey pools, you've bought hockey pool magazines and that sort of stuff. So every magazine has like one of those do's and don'ts sections in them. So read up on those. It's good information in there. So that's one of my suggestions.
Okay. So let's go on to the third topic then, Mike. And now there are a ton of players in the NHL. We've already talked about that. Now, do you have any tips on making it easier to sort through all these players that you are listing? I mean, it's got to be somewhat difficult, and for people that are new at it, maybe even a little bit overwhelming.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things I would suggest, and I mean, it's something that we've done way back when we first started doing pools, like way back in the 80s, is get yourself a hockey pool magazine. It will, they're not going to be 100% accurate, obviously. However, they're a good guideline to have to help you along, especially if you're newer for some of these pools. And you know what? We got some guys in our pools that, you know what, it would help even some of the older guys too. So, I mean, um, what I do every year is I get one or two of these, and I compare what they rank players at and what I think they're going to do, and at the end of the day, I'm going to kind of go with my gut feel on who I want to pick. So, and that's what it comes down to. I mean, and if there's a couple of guys that you're like, oh, this guy, they're very similar, pick the guy. In my opinion, pick the guy that you're going to want to see play if it's a team that you like, for one.
That's a great
But
point. Yeah.
another thing that I should add on there that I should have added on in the don't section is don't follow your heart and just pick players from your favorite team. Trust
You
me,
mean
we've
I
all
shouldn't
done
pick
it.
all? You mean I shouldn't pick all Toronto Maple Leafs? Is that what you're
Uh,
saying?
uh, Probably not. No. I mean, we've all done it at one point or another through the course of our hockey pool careers. Like I remember way back when, like I'm like, I picked a whole bunch of Flyers, and I mean the Flyers were good, but some of the players weren't as good on as they were putting points up as they were on paper. So, but so yeah, so that's a couple of the things that I would say to do. Get yourself a hockey pool magazine. Get so it gives you a bit of a guideline, okay? Because I mean, there are knowledgeable people that make these, so you want to try to go in with some good information as opposed to just, like I said, just looking at last year's stats. That's not going to do you any favors generally.
All right. Excellent. Excellent. Now, do you keep track of other managers' cash? Now, I know some of these hockey pools, you're bidding on players. So, in the middle of trying to keep track of everything else in the middle of the pool, do you keep track of what another manager would have left for cash?
Well, to a certain degree, and for these type of pools that you got to keep track of other people's cash, these are the auction style pools. So with that, you should be paying some attention. More so, you want to pay attention to your cash. But once you get right down to the nitty gritty, where you don't have a ton of players left to pick, if there's a player you really want, say it's a defenseman, and there's another owner that has a lot of cap room left and they need a defenseman, you might want to just be careful when you put that player out, because if that person wants them as well, they can easily overbid you. So that's the time frame that you really want to be paying closer attention to what other owners have for cash when you're down to the last handful of picks. Basically, is generally when that would happen.
Excellent. Now, this is something I was thinking of the other night. Can the team, the division, or even the conference make a difference in who it is that you decide to pick?
To a certain degree, yes. As far as conference, I would say not really. But it all depends on your pool format. If you're looking for a pool that you're basic, if you're or if you're in a pool that you're looking to just basically pick the best players, then that doesn't really matter. Um, you might want to consider the teams a little bit because obviously you're going to want the players that are on the better teams. With that being said, overlooking the very good players on the weak teams is not really a good strategy because they're going to get you their points as well. The only downside to the players that are on the weaker teams is if your pool that you're in has a plus minus category, well, there's a good chance you're going to take a bit of a hit for points when you factor in the plus minus because there's been some players like that have been on some very weak teams that have put up good points, but the plus minus has really hurt them as far as like what you're counting for points as well. So that's the only negative when it comes to you know uh, picking players off the weaker teams is generally the plus minus would be an issue. And I mean, if they're a weaker team, they probably don't have a ton of scores in that case. So you just want to kind of target the better ones.
Okay, excellent, excellent. Now, Mike, it's time for the Fool's Gold section. What's that? Fool's Gold section. Now, what is the Fool's Gold section? Well, Mike, we want to talk about some players. I know people here listening and watching want to hear about some players. Now, I know that you don't want to give away all your secrets, all your secret picks, but I've managed to convince you to throw a player or two out there that people maybe should keep an eye on. But first, before we do that, the Fool's Gold section is exactly what it sounds like. I want to know some players out there that you should avoid at all costs. Players that some people may think are diamonds in the rough, and they're actually just rough diamonds. So, Mike, what do you think?
All right, so I made a little list there. So of I made four goalies, four defensemen, and a little bit more forwards. So we'll start with the goalies. Guys you want to avoid. And the first one that I had on my list is, and I'm gonna get into this, is John Gibson of the Ducks. So when he first came into the league, he put up some pretty good numbers, but he's been in quite the slump, shall we say, for the last several years. So thinking he's going to turn it around, he's not. And news came out today that he had to have appendectomy surgery, so he's going to be out for 3 to 6 weeks. So
So
that
just today
furthest,
that came out?
it just came out today, yeah. And I
Of
made my
course.
list there a little while back. So avoid John Gibson. He's not going to help your team. Don't pick him and hope for a trade. He's just not good. Okay, his best days were long, long, long ago. Um, the next few are Darcy Kemper of the LA Kings has not had very good seasons the last since he won the cup with Colorado. Don't expect that to change with the Kings. Tristan Jarry of the Penguins, not quite sure he's going to end up being the starter with his performances over the last couple of years. He's obviously going to get the first shot at it because he's been there for a while. He's won Stanley Cups while he was there, or sorry, hasn't won Stanley Cups, but they've been a cup contender while he's been there. So avoid Tristan Jarry. I don't think he's going to have a great season. And the last one is Jonas Gustafsson of Minnesota. I'll tell you why. Is Jesper Wallstedt is waiting to take his job, and who knows, by the end of training camp, he might have it. I watched the game last night that Dallas played against Minnesota, and the first goal was like the puck went way up into the air, and he lost it, and it bounced right in behind him. So I would avoid Jonas Gustafsson. Yes, he's potentially going into the season as the starting goalie in Minnesota. He's not going to end the season as the starting goalie in Minnesota.
Okay.
Um, so those are a few of the goalies. Next up is some of the defense. Brett Burns, great player, has had some really great seasons, but the great seasons are done. So if you're expecting any more than 40 points from Brent Burns, and that might be pushing it, well, you're better off looking somewhere else. He's not going to do it. The Hurricanes brought in Gostisbehere to run the power play, so I don't foresee Brent Burns, cracking the 40-point mark. And if he does, it might only be if Gostisbehere gets hurt and he gets first line power play time. Next is Seth Jones for the Blackhawks. Yes, he's their number one defenseman, but
He
he's been
is.
he's been really inconsistent since he's the last. Well, I mean, Chicago's just not a very good team yet. I mean, they brought in some good pieces and Bertuzzi and Teravainen. However, they're still, and they should be better than last year, but they're still not going to be a team that's going to score a ton of goals. So don't expect a resurgence from Seth Jones. Next is Thomas Chabot, always an injury concern. He's hurt every year. So if you think, oh, this is the year he's going to stay healthy and get 60, 65 points, he's most likely not. Uh, and not only that, but Jake Sanderson is going to be probably the guy in Ottawa that's going to run the power play, which puts Chabot in the second power play unit. So um, don't think that he's going to be healthy and put up all these points. It's very unlikely. And the last defenseman is Chris Letang, and he's had great seasons. He still even put up a little bit over 40 points last year. However, he's older. He's getting hurt more frequently. They've got Erik Karlsson there, so that means he's not going to. His days of putting up 50, 60 points are probably over. If you can get 40 points out of him, that's probably what best case scenario. Next up is some of the forwards. So Jonathan Huberdeau, obviously the trade from Florida to Calgary did nothing good for him at all. Don't expect the Florida days again. If he can put up 60 points, that would be best case scenario, I think. So don't expect a ton out of Jonathan Huberdeau. Those days are over, especially on a rebuilding team like Calgary. Um, special shout out here for one of the guys in one of my pools, Taylor Hall. It seems to be a fan favorite for one of the guys in one of my pools. He loves to pick Taylor Hall, thinking that he's going to get the 100 points like he was doing when he was MVP. Uh, if he could put up a tenth out of those 100 points now, it's probably a bit of a bonus. That's just me taking a shot at him, but Taylor Hall, he's hurt all the time. The potential of him playing with Bedard, sure, it's there. However, it's just a matter of time before he gets hurt again, misses long stretches, and he's a lot older now, so his point production is not going to be as high, even if he were to play. So try to avoid Taylor Hall. Sean Monahan went to Columbus this year. Had a decent year last year with Winnipeg, put up 50, 60 points. Don't expect that in Columbus. If he can put up 50 points, that'll be a good season. Very little to play with in Columbus. Laine's gone, and obviously, the Gaudreau tragedy that happened, he's not going to be there. So there's not much for him to play with there. And last year was basically Monahan's best year in quite a while because he has been hurt notoriously over the last few years as well. So avoid Sean Monahan. David Perron brought in to play probably a second line role, but I don't think he's late 30s, pushing 40. So it's only a matter of time before his production slows down, and so this is probably going to be the year, I would guess. Moving on, Sean Couturier of the Flyers. I had to pick a Flyer out there too. I just can't pick on everybody, but he's not going to live up to his contract. That I can say. He's probably best suited as a third line player at this point of his career. He's been hurt a lot. Um, was coming into the league. He was always known as a really good defensive player. And to be honest with you, like he had a few good offensive seasons. However, I don't foresee many more good offensive seasons out of him. If he can put up 50 points, that's probably the max that you're going to get out of Couturier now. Um, Braden Shen of the St. Louis Blues, another player who's getting a little older, getting a little bit more comfortable in his pretty much third line role. So 40 to 50 points is best case scenario for Braden Shen. So don't think he's going to get those 65 point seasons anymore. They're not going to happen. And that pretty much covers all the fool's gold, I guess. Those players there, I would say. And there's more. However, I didn't want to speak for the whole league. So
Well, I mean, that's pretty good. That way to cover the topic, Mike. That's a good job covering fool's gold. Good job. So we're going to get on to the fifth and really final topic for tonight. And that is now people want to hear some of these, maybe secret picks to keep an eye out for. I think I've convinced you to share one or two of them with us, with our audience. So, what do you have to say, Mike? Are you going to share any of your secret picks with our audience here this evening?
yeah. I mean, I've got a handful, so I didn't want to list too many right off the get go, but I've got some, and I mean, some of them are a little bit more known than others. So, um, first one, and he had a pretty good year last year, and he's really starting to come into his own. Is Seth Jarvis of the Carolina Hurricanes? He really stepped up last year. Was a very consistent player. Finished the year very strong. He's a younger guy. He's only been in the league for 3 years roughly. So some guys might think, he's only done this a couple times, but he's on the upward trajectory of his career. So I wouldn't be shocked for him to put 75 points up this year.
Oh, very nice.
Potentially a point a game. Who knows? I mean, Carolina is going to rely on him a little bit more, I think, this year, whereas they lost a couple players in the offseason. So they lost Gensel, they lost Teravainen. So I think he's a guy they're going to lean on a little bit more. So you can expect a little bit more out of him. Wyatt Johnston of the Dallas Stars was pretty much his rookie year last year. I think he got a few games in the previous season, but this past year was his rookie year. He played really, really well. One of the top line guys now in Dallas. All around good player. So he's going to be a really good player to have this year going into your draft if you can get your hands on him. He should put up 70, 75 points, maybe more. But I'll be conservative with the 70, 75 point mark. And next is since I did put a flyer on the Fool's Goals list, I did put one on the kind of sleeper list. And he's not a huge favorite of mine, I'll be honest with you. However, it's Morgan Frost. And I think Tortorella has learned to trust him a little bit more, to give him a little bit more top line playing time. So I think he's the guy that's going to be playing with Michkov this year. So I think that should bring
Okay.
out a little bit more out of his game because he's a passer and Michkov's a shooter, and the Flyers aren't known to have a ton of shooters. So I think Frost is in line to have a much better season. Wouldn't be shocked if he got 60 points. I'm not expecting, I think he had around 40 points or so last year. So I'm not expecting him to go and get a point a game, but I think he should be up in the 60, maybe 65 point range this year. Should be one of their top centermen. So, and I got a couple more. William Eklund of the San Jose Sharks, another young guy. Uh, Played very well down the stretch last year as well. Took him a little bit of time to get going, but he did pick it up once he got to midseason. Should be one of the top guys in San Jose this year. Maybe the top point producer. Who knows? But I mean, that depends on if he's playing with Celebrini or not. So, but William Eklund should be a very good pick this year. I would expect 50 to 60 points. And the only reason why I say only 50 to 60 is just because the Sharks are not a very strong team.
No, they're
Um,
really bad.
Yeah, so I mean, if he gets more than that, great. I wouldn't be shocked if he did, but I would say, in that 50 to 60 point range is probably where he'll settle in. So, which is a pretty good year for a player on the Sharks at this point. And for you, I had to throw a Maple Leaf in there, so
Oh, excellent. I was kind of wondering if you would.
I put Matthew Nyes as the guy to keep an
Oh,
eye on. I think he's going to get a good opportunity in the top two lines. He looked pretty good last year, I found. I think he's going to
yeah.
be much better this year. He's another guy I would put in maybe the 50 to 60 point range as well. Um, I mean, if you're playing on the top two lines, you got to put up at least that. I think when you're playing with Marner or Matthews or Nylander or those guys. So I think he's going to be a good one this year. And one more that I'm kind of on the fence with that could have a good year, but could not, depending on his line placement, is Las Vegas forward Pavel Dorofiev. He was decent last year in spurts. He's a young guy. Last year was his rookie year, so he didn't put up a ton of points. He put up, about 30 points, and I don't have the stats right in front of me, but roughly 30 points. So if he can find a way to get onto one of the top two lines, he's probably looking around 50 points for the season.
Oh,
But
nice.
it's all going to depend on his line placement. If he can't get on the top two lines, then he's probably going to have similar stats to what he had last year. So keep an eye on that, what Vegas does with their lines going into the season. And, he could be a last pick that pans out, or he could be a last pick that, I can drop him. He was my last pick type of thing. So,
Right. And there's also seems to be a lot of injuries on the Vegas team, which might help him move up a little bit potentially.
well, there always tends to be some injuries in Vegas. I mean,
Yeah,
last year, like,
exactly.
I mean, Eichel was healthy last year, but Stone was hurt. Thomas Hurdle, who they got at the end of the year from San Jose, he was hurt. So there's always seems to be an injury in Vegas where someone can move up a line, it seems. So in Vegas, as far as a left winger goes, they're not super deep on left wing, and he plays left wing. So it gives them a little bit of an inside edge, I guess.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, before we get to the end of the show, Mike, I just wanted to go over a comment that we had on last week's video. Someone
Okay.
named, I won't actually say the name. Someone said DeBrusque is younger and had almost the same points as Lindholm. So no drop off there because you said that they really didn't replace Lindholm last year or for this
Correct.
year. So just wondering, what do you think about that? Do you think DeBrusque is younger and had almost the same points and he's just as good as Lindholm or maybe better? What do you think?
Well, he's younger. He had roughly the same amount of points as Lindholm. However, when you're comparing the two, DeBrusque had some of those points in Boston, which was a very strong team, and Lindholm had his points, most of his points on a weaker team because he was with Calgary.
Right.
So, with that being said, I think that Lindholm is still the better player and will be the better player this year. So for whomever made the comment at the end of the year, if they want to call me out and say we'll compare points between DeBrusque and Lindholm at the end of the year, I feel confident that Lindholm will have more points. And not only that, but Lindholm, if you're looking to put together a hockey team, has more value than DeBrusque, in my opinion, because he's a better all around player. He's a better
Right.
defensive player. Now, granted, he didn't have a great year last year, and I'm not expecting him to be a superstar by any stretch this year. However, I do expect him to do a little bit better than DeBrusque. So maybe who knows? At the end of the year, we'll see what happens. But I'll put my money on Lindholm being the better player this year.
Excellent, Mike. Great job. Way to cover all the bases. So, is there anything else that you wanted to go over in tonight's episode, Mike? I know once again we're running a little bit late, but there was a lot we wanted to go over, and I didn't want to cut it short. So,
Yeah, with it being, last week was our first episode of the season. However, this week we got into a little bit more of the meat and potatoes of
that's right.
with players and pools and that sort of stuff. So yeah, we ran a little bit longer than we did, but hopefully it's a lot of good that I gave a lot of good information that might help some people out. I like to think I know what I'm talking about. I mean, lots might argue that I don't. However, I think some of my hockey pool track records that I've been in, speaks a little bit for themselves. So, but yeah, no, I don't have anything else to add for this week. But yeah, so hopefully, some of this stuff was helpful, and who knows, maybe I'll end up eating crow on a couple of them there towards the end of the year. But I like to think that I kind of got these ones down pat. So we'll see what happens.
Excellent, excellent. Well, just like I said before, this is predicting the future. Very, very tough to do. Anything is possible when it comes to trying to predict the future. You can only take the best information you have and make some sort of an assessment of it and come up with a response. That's really all you can do. And all we're trying to do here is just help someone help them get a bit of an edge over maybe some of their opposition. That's all we're trying to do. So let us know where you think we went wrong by sounding off in the comments. That's what the comment section is for. Like, share, and subscribe. It really helps us out. And we will see you next week, folks. Later.
Later.